Morning, Broncos fans. Welcome to Legends of Mile High. Today, we are going to talk about roster moves, wrapping up the week, but with a little bit of a flair, so to speak. How is this team really going to look at their roster and use the entire roster, right? Practice squad in the short term, IR, as people are calling it, but the injured reserve eligible to return list. That's what we're going to be talking about because Sean Payton came out and even said he doesn't look at the practice squad as just for development. He actually looks at it as part of the roster as a whole. So we're going to jump into that, talk about it, dig into it, bring your questions to the live chat, and hopefully I can answer them for you. And also, we are going to bring back the Mile High Legend today. We're going to talk a little bit about the biggest draft bust in the history of the Denver Broncos. So stay tuned for that at the end. And I'm going to say hi to some folks in the chat. Dominique Martin coming in bright and early. So thank you so much for being here this morning early, saying, hey, Thomas, Mile High salute to my Broncos family. Mile High Huddle for life. Go Broncos. Thanks, Dominique, for being here. Appreciate it. And David Youngkin's in here this morning, right before the show started. So thank you for being here, David. As always, your support of the show and your questions have always been very appreciated. David says, morning Broncos country. I think we'll be fine with the starting lineup. Even the O-line will be okay. Yeah, we better hope so. The O-line is very, very important to this team and to Russell Wilson's progress back to where he was prior to the disaster of last season. Jeremy Sean's coming in. Good morning, Jeremy. Thank you for being here this morning, as you typically are. So I really appreciate you being here pretty much every morning. So since this show started. So thank you so much, Jeremy. Jeremy says, morning, Thomas. What player hurt you the most to cut or trade? That is an interesting, there was a few that kind of were a bit of a shocker to me. I guess there wasn't many surprises, although I was surprised about how they used the wide receivers on the active roster and who got cut. But we're going to address that as we talk about it. But the one player that I thought wasn't necessarily going to make the roster, I think that he made a really good push to do it, other than he couldn't play special teams very well. And that was Taylor Grimes. Taylor Grimes, when I was out at camp, he was catching everything thrown his way. He never dropped the ball. You never see him miss it. If it was catchable, he was catching it. And he ran crisp routes. But unfortunately, he was a smaller guy. He needs some development, and he couldn't play special teams. They tried him as a returner. He was a little bit small. I don't think they thought he could play any of the coverage teams and things like that. So he isn't in their plans. And that was unfortunate. I thought, man, that would be a good one to bring back, put on the practice squad, let him develop. He obviously showed that he could play. But the team thought otherwise. And I think that's because Sean Payton said his philosophy is he thinks of this as an entire roster, right? And the practice squad changes has made that possible. It used to be the practice squad was really for development players, but now I kind of call it a mini minor league, but I like Sean Payton's philosophy on it. Can these players develop enough to be on the 53-man roster? And he means this year. Can they develop enough to be, a potential call-up, so to speak, to play on the 53-man roster on game day? And they just didn't see Taylor Grimes being able to do that. I thought they should have taken a chance on him. So that was the one that kind of hurt me the most. The trade, the trades were fine. I mean, Alberto getting traded, I know he had a big kind of preseason and final week of practice, but when I saw him out there, from my perspective, he was easily the fourth or fifth wide receiver, tight end out there. He wasn't catching the ball that well. So his final push didn't get over the top, but they went out and got somebody on the practice squad that had a similar preseason, actually probably better all around preseason than Alberto did. So that trade didn't really bother me that much because he wasn't going to get on the field that much. He really wasn't. And, he wasn't a special teams ace. So that was fine. And, the kicker trade, it is what it is. I think they traded one for another. I don't know who's gonna end up being better, but they dang sure better make a kick when it matters. So thanks for that question, Jeremy. Really appreciate it. And we got Mark Hoynak came in, said, "Good morning, all." And he says, Tommy Maddox, I say. Tommy Maddox. Yes, Tommy Maddox was a Denver draft bust. Absolutely. One of the ones that should be talked about in that list of major busts. The thing about Tommy Maddox was he went to Pittsburgh and had a pretty darn good season. So, his career wasn't a total disaster. It just was with the Denver Broncos. But I'll tell you what Tommy Maddox did. Tommy Maddox brought Mike Shanahan to the Denver Broncos as head coach, basically. So Dan Reeves decided that he wanted to kind of part ways with John Elway. He wanted to trade him. He drafted Tommy Maddox in the first round when he shouldn't have. They didn't need Tommy Maddox. They needed other players. And Dan Reeves, that kind of came back to bite Dan Reeves, right? And Dan Reeves ended up getting fired because Pat Bowlen chose John Elway over Dan Reeves, which was the right decision. And I know that Mike Shanahan didn't come back right away. They went with Wade Phillips for a couple of years because Mike Shanahan basically didn't want to be the replacement for Dan Reeves. He kind of said that. He said, "No, I don't want to be the replacement for Dan Reeves." There was some, bad blood and things like that. So Wade Phillips came in and he brought in Jim Fassel, which Jim Fassel changed the offense. Went to a West Coast offense, which helped John Elway become statistically a much better quarterback. He had his best season in 1993 when Jim Fassel was the offensive coordinator. And then that carried forward with Mike Shanahan, got 2 Super Bowls out of it. So Tommy Maddox may be a big bust, but he actually helped the team in the long run, so to speak. So that's why he's not the guy. It's a little known name that people have forgotten about. So stick around to the end and we will talk about it. Now let's just jump into a little bit about the roster, right? So the practice squad roster is interesting now, right? It used to be that it was, there were 6 and then they kind of moved it up to 8, I think, back in the day. And it was really for development players, right? And other than the international exemption that they have, this practice squad team is a good mix of development players and players who could be called up immediately. And the nice thing about the roster rules is you can protect up to 4 players for the entire season. Like you can protect them every week. So there's really only a short window between the game and Tuesday where they can someone could try and poach them off of the practice squad, but you can protect them so they can't be taken. So you have your guys that can stick around for the long haul, and then you can call up on game day, and it doesn't affect the 53-man roster up to 3 times per season. A player, actually 2 players. So that's what they're going to probably end up doing with this wide receiver group, right? They've only got 4 wide receivers on the 53-man roster, and one of them's hurt, Jerry Jeudy. So hopefully he's not hurt for long, and the roster moves that they did make indicate that he is not going to be hurt for too long. So what they're going to end up doing, and from my perspective, they're going to take Philip Dorsett, and they're probably going to call him up for the first 3 weeks. And then after that, they're going to have to make a decision. They're going to have to leave him on the practice squad or outright release him or put him on the 53-man roster, which they could do. I don't see it. I think they're going to use him up, and that's what they brought him in for. And then they're going to do a rotation of little Jordan Humphrey and probably David Sills, wide receiver that they picked up from the Giants. They're going to rotate them. So that's going to get 6 weeks of somebody on the roster before they have to, on game day, before they have to make a roster move. And that's going to really get this team to a point where maybe KJ Hamler comes back, they put him on the active roster, or they decide to make a trade or something of that nature to kind of fill out that role. Or they'll put, which I'm thinking they'll probably put little Jordan Humphrey onto the actual roster at that time, and maybe even David Sills. Excuse me. I'm going to check here to see if I have any. Sorry, I'm here by myself, so I'm checking to see if I have any Facebook comments in here. And in fact, I actually forgot to bring in a couple of streams, so bear with me for a second as I make this happen. Sorry about Facebook users that. Really apologize for that. I messed up and didn't bring in that last stream, but it is here now. I'm gonna say good morning to Gary Palmer coming with a super chat. Thank you for your generosity and your support of the show, Gary. As always, thank you so much. saying, good morning, Thomas. Love the show. Go Broncos and buck 'em. I'm glad you love the show because I love it. It's my first podcast ever. It was my idea of how to run this, and I really do enjoy it. It's a wonderful show for me because I love talking about older Broncos too, and hopefully you do as well, or I love hearing about it as well. So thank you, Gary. Appreciate the support. All right. So now that I'm finally got everything squared away here, technically wise, I'm going to make sure I'm not missing any of the Facebook stars and Facebook comments. So bear with me just 1 second. Okay. All right. Now that all the technical stuff is taken care of, again, I'm here by myself in the morning. Scott is actually doing another show, a national show now. So with the Falcons. So that's pretty cool. Check that out, but obviously don't check it out when my show is going on. Just check it out later. I'm only kidding. You guys can do whatever you want. Anyway, I'm going to grab a couple more comments and then we'll keep talking about this roster. Jeremy's come back in saying next week Thomas will have morphed 100% into Kevin Costner in Yellowstone. Yeah, the hat is sticking around on this Legends of Mile High only because I asked the fans and they said keep it. So I wore it to training camp to keep the sun off of my face, and so I didn't get too sunburnt, and people liked it, so I decided to keep it around. And I come from a ranch. I grew up on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. And, so I got a little cowboy in me. So that's, it is sticking around. I actually have not seen Yellowstone. It is on the list to watch. And I'm excited to get it, on the top of the list and watch it, but I haven't seen it yet. So no spoilers. Now we got David Youngkin coming back in saying every great team has issues with the O-line sometimes. When the Broncos do 60 or more snaps and gel and they start trusting each other, then you can look out. Absolutely, David. You're absolutely right, because I was saying this from the beginning when everybody was worried about all the training camp problems with the O-line and stuff. I said, look, number one, they haven't all been together. Garrett Bowles was in and out of the practice lineup because of they were, taking it easy with him as a veteran and coming back from injury. And also McGlinchey was gone for the first 5 days, I believe, of camp. And then he ended up getting hurt. So they haven't been fully together. And that's, that's the thing with O-line. It takes a while to get them to gel. And of any position, this is the one that needs to be the most in sync together, right? For really, for high execution and, great play from the O-line. So you can ask any O-line guru or any ex-O-lineman, and they'll tell you the same thing. So I really am looking forward to see how they show up together. And you saw the improvement as preseason went along. They looked pretty bad in the first game, but got much better as it went along. So, and I like some of their moves that they made. The one move on the offensive line that really kind of was a bit interesting to me was cutting Kyle Fuller and just cutting him completely and not even bringing him back to the practice squad. I thought that Kyle Fuller, his versatility at center and guard was enough to keep him on the active roster. And I thought he played better than Wattenberg as well. But I don't know. They decided to go with Wattenberg, which was interesting to me. I wasn't impressed with how Wattenberg played, but Wattenberg can play all three interior line positions, and that has value. I've said that plenty of times. If you are versatile in the NFL and you can do many things, you can stick around, especially on the O-line. If you can play multiple positions on the O-line, you've got a spot in the NFL. Quinn Bailey's another example. Excuse me. I think his versatility at guard and tackle was very valuable. I think he played very, very, very well. And when we talk about this roster, one of the things that you're going to see is you're going to actually see. I love Alex Palczewski. I think he was my guy from the beginning. The first, I said he was going to be the undrafted rookie that made it, and he did, along with 3 others, which was pretty impressive. But you're going to probably see him sit on the injured reserve list for a while until they actually need him. Because I think if he comes to the roster, he's just going to be a game day inactive. Because unless injuries happen, I mean, really, Cam Fleming is going to be that swing tackle, and then you have Quinn Bailey, who's going to be that guard tackle substitution when needed. So they're not going to really need Alex Palczewski for a while, and that's why they put him on IR, and he's going to sit there for a while, and hopefully he can, get onto the roster soon enough. But I think you'll just see him sit on IR, and they can keep him on IR for a while, so they don't have to bring him back in 4 weeks. It's just a minimum of 4 weeks. Albert Knopper's coming in. How you doing, Albert? Thanks for being here this morning. Saying good morning, Thomas, and all the Broncos and Mile High Huddle fans. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for being here, Albert. I really appreciate it. And then Albert's coming right back in saying, to me, it looked like Cush was the weakest link, but now I think we have a top 10 O-line. When this quintet gets together and the tight ends opposing defenses, and with the tight ends opposing defenses, beware. Albert, absolutely. That was another one of my my picks was this dark horse surprise candidate, and that was out of necessity. I said Cushenberry's going to be that guy, or he's going to be complete failure, and he has really stepped up. He actually looked very solid in camp and preseason. I'm impressed, and it's showing you why Sean Payton and those coaches didn't make any real moves at center to replace him. They believed in him, and he is actually, so far, that belief, he's made that pay off. So it was pretty interesting how his improvement has been. And I think a lot of his lack of improvement last year had to do with coaching and scheme. It just didn't fit him. Butchberry wasn't that great of a teaching coach, and I think that's what Cushenberry really needed. And here he is. I thought he was going to be the surprise steal of the draft, but it didn't happen. And maybe it does come to fruition this year. So thanks, Albert. Appreciate it. All right. Now, the other thing that I thought was a little bit curious to me, and I think it has mostly to do that they wanted development defensive line, is they have a full stable of defensive linemen on the roster. So I didn't think they needed to have 4 defensive linemen on the practice squad, especially Lancaster. I mean, Tyler Lancaster, I thought was going to make the final squad, and he didn't. And they brought him back on the practice squad. And then they also brought in kept Mustafar and Jordan Jackson, which is to me, I think those are the development guys that they both looked pretty good to me in preseason, Jordan Jackson especially. And I think those guys can be called up if necessary. And then they kept the international exemption guys. That makes 4, but they didn't bring anybody into the interior or the off-ball linebacker group. They only have 4 off-ball linebackers. Someone gets hurt, they're going to be scrambling. And I thought, man, they should have at least brought one of the person to that position group onto the practice squad to, for just in case kind of thing. But they didn't, and we'll see how that goes. Hopefully that group can stay healthy. Lawrence Rivera coming in from Facebook. Thank you for coming here, Lawrence. It's good to see you. Saying, what up, guys? Having you and Scott on the Nick time is going to make me get a second phone. Yeah, unfortunately, we definitely, there's a lot of podcasts out there, and it's hard to choose which one to watch. And I really appreciate you all coming in and watching this one. Like I said, I enjoyed the show, and it's kind of, it's really kind of near and dear to my heart. So anybody that jumps in here, I really appreciate it. All right. And keep looking here for Facebook, and it is, I'll tell you, I mean, I know that it doesn't seem difficult, but when you are here by yourself trying to run the stream and check on the comments and everything else, it's not as easy as it looks. I'll tell you. And so hopefully I don't miss any of your comments in here, and I may. So, but I apologize. Keith Brugman coming in. Thank you for being here, Keith. Really appreciate it. It was great seeing you out there at camp. And, Keith has a podcast as well. So go check it out. He has a podcast. I'm not sure how often it occurs, but go check it out. Keith's a great member of Broncos country, so give him some support. Keith says, my surprise has to be the 4 wide receivers on the 53 with 1 injured. Yeah, it seems strange, but if you like Sean Payton says, if you look at the practice squad and even the short-term injured reserve as a whole roster, it kind of takes shape, right? That's why they went out and put 4 wide receivers onto the practice squad. right? Two of them are experienced players, and two of them are kind of more development players, I think. Well, actually, you could even say three. I mean, little Jordan Humphrey's experienced, and David Sills has 2 years, so they do have some experience. But so maybe it's three experienced, one development guy in Michael Bandy, and then you can kind of understand. Well, that's part of the roster now, right? So they actually have the ability to have 7 wide receivers really ready to go. And even though Judy's hurt, so 6 until he comes back. So you got to look at it that way. But it was a surprise. The way the roster was built was a surprise to me from the beginning. So thanks, Keith. I appreciate that. Albert Knoppers, DBR podcast on Tuesday evenings is a great one. It is Keith Brugman, me, and Jody Moncrief. There you go, DBR podcast. Thanks, Albert, for bringing that out. So that's I'll check that out, and I encourage other people to give it a watch. So we've got to support each other here in Broncos country. And then we're going to talk about a little bit. Callaway went to the Raiders and Washington to the Chiefs. Yeah, Keith, I was a little bit. I didn't think I thought Callaway wasn't going to make the roster. I thought maybe he would make it based on experience with Sean Payton, but he did not look that great in camp or preseason. He did nothing from my perspective to warrant being on the team, and that's what happened. He didn't even come back for the practice squad. That I just thought he just played, pretty mediocre for the most part all around. The one that does kind of bother me is Montreal Washington going to the Chiefs. I like Montreal Washington. I think got a bad deal last year with the way the coaches handled him. He did everything that from my perspective, that I saw to make the roster or at least make the practice squad. He played pretty well, I thought, in both the preseason and camp, at both receiver and returner. I mean, there was some mistakes. Don't get me wrong. He made some mistakes, but I thought that you can develop him into kind of a gadget player, and I guess Sean Payton didn't think so. So. Oh, well, that's what you got to do. And you got to move on. And it stinks that they went to our division rivals, right? Because, Montreal, Washington, probably, he may not get much playing time, but if he comes out and does something, a big return or something against the Broncos when they play the Chiefs, that's going to be a bummer to me. So. But what can you do? You've got to take the roster as it is and see how it goes. I'm actually kind of happy with how the roster fell. Really, I mean, they kept all of their draftees. They kept they think that they have a good eye for talent, so they've got 4 undrafted free agents on the roster. So, I mean, the Broncos, they're trusting what they saw. They're trusting what they saw in the draft. They kept all of them, and they're trusting what they saw after the draft. And I can't believe it's amazing that four undrafted rookies made the roster. That was amazing. It's amazing. And we got Victor Ferrer coming in. Thank you for being here, Victor. Appreciate it. I haven't seen you here before, so if you're new, I appreciate it. Or if you're a new commenter, I appreciate that as well. And he says, do you see us competing with KC with this present roster? We have to break this streak. Yeah, well, I'll tell you, Victor, that the Broncos have competed with the Chiefs. They've been competitive, even with a terrible team, right? Even though they've had a losing team for the last 6 years, they have been pretty close. I mean, in fact, other than the Thursday night game, as pointed out on Mile High Insiders, that Thursday night game a few years ago where they got blown out, it's all been 1-score games. So I think they can compete with the Chiefs. They have to get the monkey off their back. They have to at least split with the Chiefs this year. If they get swept by the Chiefs again, then you can kiss their playoff hopes goodbye. The Broncos, their playoff hopes are probably dashed if they can't at least win one against the Chiefs, because the division, you're going to have to win 12 games to win the division, and you're probably going to have to get 10 games in to go into the playoffs if you're lucky. And that means they have to beat the Chiefs once, and they have to split with the Chargers, and they probably have to sweep the Raiders in order for that to happen. And they got to take care of business at home. And I think the combination of Sean Payton and the moves they've made on this roster will be better equipped to compete with KC, right? But from my perspective, and I kept seeing this about Vance Joseph, his defense has to come up when it matters, right? So if the Broncos are ahead and the Chiefs are going to march down the field and score, and they're going to lose. if the defense cannot make a play when it matters. And that's what I'm going to judge Vance Joseph on this season. It's not whether or not he's in the top 5 in offense. It's can he put his players in position to succeed and make a play when it matters the most? That's what I'm going to judge him on. If he can have a pretty solid defense, be in the top 15, and that happens, then it's a successful season for Vance Joseph. Keith, I'm going to go back to you. Thomas, he says, what do you have to say about your guy Palczewski making the 53? Yeah, I loved it. He earned it though, right? From when I back in May when I said he was going to be the guy, so I think it was you that asked me. I can't remember. Someone asked me on a podcast, and I said it was going to be him back in May, and that was even before they re-signed Cam Fleming, and then I still stuck with it. Even after that, I said, it's going to be a little bit harder, but he earned it. I watched him in camp. You watched him in camp. He played well. He outplayed Isaiah Prince by quite a bit, I thought. And I think, his experience really from college, his big time experience from college really showed up. And I think he can even develop a little bit more. He's got shorter arms, which kind of, people, that's probably why he didn't get drafted. The people weren't going to take a chance on a short-armed offensive. They're not short, but they're not really that long-armed, offensive tackle that the NFL really likes. But I think he can develop a little bit more, and I think he'd be a solid right tackle. Whether or not he's their future right tackle, I don't know. But I'm happy for him. It was great. It was great for him, and his story is wonderful. So, I think it's I'm happy about it, and I'm happy for him. Eric's coming in saying, if Drew Sanders stays healthy, does he have a good chance of being Defensive Rookie of the Year? Well, that's a good question. I don't think he has a good chance at being Defensive Rookie of the Year for a couple reasons. One, you got Jerry Jeudy. You've got Alex Singleton and Josie Jewell starting. And so that's going to limit Drew Sanders' playing time. If one of them gets hurt, then he's going to have to step in, of course. But if they stay healthy, it's going to limit his play time. And I love Drew Sanders, his potential. But from what I saw in preseason and at camp, his athleticism was far better than his experience, so to speak, his read and react, his ability to be in the right position at all times, because he's a rookie and he's not quite ready to jump into that starting role. So I think there's going to be a little bit more growing pains for Drew Sanders as he goes along, but he's still going to make those, once in a while you'll see an impact play out of him. And I think, the year 2 and 3 is when he's really going to take off. I just think there's other defensive players out there who are going to be starters, who are going to be playing from the get-go, who'll have a better chance. But I do like Drew Sanders' potential, and hopefully he's makes that one play that they keep talking about every game. They keep talking about he makes one play that no one else can make. Well, I only saw one play in preseason, and that was that interception in return. But hopefully that happens every game. Every time he gets in there, hopefully he makes that play that they're all talking about. So I look for Drew Sanders to be a starter next year and a solid defender for his career, just because his athleticism is incredible. But I think he needs to add a little weight. I think he's a little slight. I think he can get pushed around a little bit too much. At 6'5", 230, he's a little thin. I think put a little muscle on him. Hopefully he doesn't lose that speed in doing so. Jeremy Jean coming back in saying Palczewski and Forsyth give us some nice young depth. Yeah, absolutely. I like the combination. I didn't think Forsyth was that great. They kept him around. I watched him in camp, and he's going to take a little time to develop. So, but you have to remember that this is probably Cushionberry's last year, unless he comes out and plays great and they re-sign him. He's an unrestricted free agent, so he may be gone. So you may be looking at a new center next year, and hopefully Palczewski can, be that solid depth piece and then actually, move into a starting role at some point. We'll see. But they need to address the right tackle position for sure, which they did with McGlinchey, and he's going to be around for a while. And so Palczewski may just be a depth guy for a while. So until that McGlinchey contract runs out. All right, folks. I'm very happy with how the comments were in the chat. So thank you so much. I'm going to talk a little bit now about I'm going to do the Mile High Legend. So and then I'm going to jump off. So thank you for being here, and next week we'll be on. And don't forget, I'm on Saturday nights with Ron White with the Orange and Blue View. And going into the season, we're going to be doing the previews. So join in to see what we have to say about the Broncos and their upcoming game every week when the game is on Sunday. So check that out. And then, of course, check out Mile High Insiders on Wednesday with Luke Patterson and I. And the other thing, the Mile High podcast last night had TJ Ward on. So don't forget to check that out. That's probably, his TJ Ward's probably a really good interview for the most part. And I'm sure it was very informative. So go check that out. All right. So today's Mile High Legend is a little story about the biggest draft bust in the history of the Denver Broncos and actually how he ended up sacking the legendary quarterback for the team, John Elway. And now the Broncos have had their share of draft misses. Most recently, people can point to Paxton Lynch, right? A guy who would rather play video games than learn an offense. Or if you've been a fan of the team since their back-to-back championships in the late 90s, Marcus Nash is a name that can come to mind. A first-round wide receiver who ended up only catching 4 passes in the NFL. Not very good production. However, the worst bust in team history was in 1988. The Broncos had just played in their second straight Super Bowl, getting there, by the rocket arm of John Elway, so to speak. And they were only to be embarrassed again by a historic defensive collapse. And the team was looking for a way to strengthen their defense, and particularly their defensive line. And one item that you have to remember that must be factored into the story is the draft process in the 1980s is nothing like we know it today. The NFL Combine didn't even exist until 1982, and not all the teams went to the Combine until 1985. So the Combine, the pro days, the testing, the private workouts, all of that stuff we see today was not the norm in 1988. And furthermore, head coach Dan Reeves ran the show. The team had scouts and a general manager, but Reeves had total control over the roster and the draft. And he had made a few mistakes on draft day for sure, but none would be as epic a failure as was to come in 1988. The Syracuse Orangemen had just finished an 11-0 season, their first undefeated season in 28 years. And then they tied Auburn in the Sugar Bowl. Now, Ted Gregory, a defensive lineman, was credited for much of the defensive success of that team. The team in 1986 was 105th against the run. And then they went all the way up to number 1 the next year. And then when Ted Gregory was injured and missed some time, they fell all the way back to 14th. So his defensive prowess was really quite interesting. And he was a consensus first-team All-American that year, and even though he had missed games. He had suffered a major injury, so to speak, for his knee, a major injury. But he was drafted on reputation alone. And when I say draft on reputation alone, I really mean it. Dan Reeves made him the 26th overall pick that season, and he'd never even met with the college standout prior to the draft. In fact, their first meeting was after the draft, and that was when Dan Reeves realized who they just drafted wasn't the person that was built, right? Reeves famously proclaimed, "I am taller than he is," after their first meeting. And Gregory was listed as 6'1" and 260 pounds, which was not unheard of for a defensive lineman in the 1980s. But those listed measurements were obviously fudged. A more accurate estimate was he was a 5'9", 240-pound nose tackle. That was pretty light and small for that day. And then there was no inspection at all of his knee injury. So as you can imagine, Gregory did not live up to his draft status. His knee gave out in training camp, and that promoted a backlash from the media. I mean, they offered up scathing reviews for selecting a player sight unseen who was actually damaged goods. And the last ditch effort by the Broncos to save this massive bust of a first round selection was to trade him to the New Orleans Saints right before the season started. So Gregory did not play a single down with the Denver Broncos. So the team's hopes of bolstering their defense went down in flames, and the unit ranked 20th out of 28 teams that season, and the franchise limped to an 8-8 record. Fortunately for the team, the ramifications of that draft bust only really impacted the Broncos that one season, and they returned to the Super Bowl in 1989 with the number 1 ranked defense. The bust also changed the Broncos draft process as they began a standard process of meeting with the prospects prior to the draft. Now, Gregory did get to play in the NFL. He actually got into 3 games for the Saints in 1988 before his knee gave way finally for good, and he bowed out of the NFL. And in week 12, the Saints routed the Broncos 42-0, and Gregory recorded his only sack of his NFL career when he took down John Elway in the final game of Gregory's short-lived and historically failed NFL career. And that is your Mile High Legend. Thank you for joining, and have a great day, Broncos fans.